You open your financial app. Your paycheck just ticked. The number looks normal. It might even be a little higher than previous year. But nevertheless, you feel poor as soon as you close the app. It feels like a luxury to buy groceries. It seems like a fraud to pay rent. A little appliance and a coffee and sandwich cost the same amount. Then you get the news. Good news, the cost of living is going down. And you just look at the screen like, are you kidding? Why does life still feel like it's getting more costly if inflation is going down? Why does your salary feel less even when inflation goes down? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Inflation going down does not mean prices are going down. It merely implies prices are going up slower. And that minuscule discrepancy is the reason millions of people feel like they're slipping behind, even while the economy is apparently improving. Let's break it down like a normal human, because this is one of the most misunderstood economic techniques in modern life. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with a little scenario. It's 2020. The world shuts down. People cease traveling, shopping, eating out. Businesses panic. Governments panic harder. So they do what governments usually do when reality starts crashing. They throw money at the problem. Stimulus checks, expanded unemployment, low interest rates, cheap loans, central banks buying assets like they're shopping on Black Friday. And at first, it feels fine, because during the crisis, prices don't explode quickly. The fire starts quietly. Then 2021 hits. Supply chains break. Factories can't keep up. Shipping containers are at the improper positions. Companies don't have workers. And suddenly, everything becomes tougher to make. And when goods get harder to create, they become more expensive. Then demand comes back. Everyone wants to buy again. But there's still not enough things, so prices start climbing. Not lightly, violently. Gas jumps, rent jumps, food jumps. Used automobiles soar so high that consumers start treating a 2012 Toyota like a rare collectible. And now inflation is officially high, which is the time you start hearing the word inflation every day like it's a celebrity controversy. But here's where the brain gets deceived. Most individuals think inflation is a switch. Inflation is either on or off, like inflation high equals prices go higher, inflation low equals prices go down. But inflation isn't a switch, it's a speedometer. It measures how rapidly prices are rising. That's it. That's the whole thing. So if inflation was 9% last year, prices were climbing fast. If inflation is 3% this year, prices are still growing, just not as fast. It's like driving a car. If you were speeding at 90 miles per hour and then slowed down to 60, you didn't reverse. You're still moving forward. You're merely slamming into your wallet at a slightly more sensible pace. So when inflation goes down, your life doesn't suddenly get cheaper. It merely stops getting more expensive nearly as aggressively, which is why the headline feels like a hoax. Now, here's the part that actually matters. Why does your salary feel smaller? Because your wage isn't competing against inflation, it's battling against pricing levels. And pricing levels don't reset, they stick. Prices go up quickly, then they become the new normal. And almost nobody lowers pricing's meter until something fails. Let's use a basic example. Imagine in 2020, your shopping bill was $100. Then inflation hits heavily. And by 2022, that identical supermarket cart costs $130. That's not crazy. That's basically what happened. Now inflation comes down in 2023. Let's say inflation decreases to 3%. That groceries bill doesn't go back to $100. It goes to $133, then $137, then $141, still climbing. And you're standing there like, why is everyone behaving like this is fixed? It's not fixed. It's just not exploding anymore. So the actual question becomes, did your salary rise sufficiently to match the new higher price level? And for most people, the answer is no. Or worse, it rose but too late. And timing is everything, because inflation hits immediately. Raises come slowly. Inflation is like a burglar with a crowbar. Raises are like a nice email chain that takes 6 months and requires 3 approvals. And now we get to the part nobody wants to say out loud. The reason your salary feels smaller is because in real life, inflation is not perceived as a statistic. It's experienced as a lifestyle deterioration. Because you don't buy the economy. You buy rent, you buy food, you buy gas, you buy daycare. And those categories don't behave like the inflation statistic on the news. They behave like predators. They go up swiftly, and they don't come back down unless compelled, especially rent. Rent is the major villain in this novel, because rent isn't just a price, rent is a system. When inflation skyrocketed, interest rates rose, and when interest rates rose, mortgages became pricey. So suddenly, millions of individuals couldn't afford to buy homes anymore, which means they stayed tenants, which means demand for rentals stayed high, which means landlords got pricing power, so rent rises. And once rent rises, it's sticky. Landlords don't wake up and say, you know what, I think I'll lower rent this year, just to be nice. That doesn't happen. Rent is a one-way elevator, and if you're inside it, you feel the floor dropping under you. Now add food. Food costs soared because fertilizer became more expensive, fuel grew more pricey, transportation became more pricey, and global shocks impacted agriculture. And even as those costs cool off, corporations generally don't rush to lower pricing, because here's the quiet corporate secret. People adapt. Consumers complain, and then they pay. Not because they want to, because they have to. So the higher price becomes usual. Then it becomes locked in. Then companies defend it like it's sacred. So even when inflation declines, your grocery bill doesn't magically reverse. It merely grows slower, which is like telling someone who's drowning, good news, the water is rising slowly now. Great, still drowning though. Now let's speak about the difficult math, the item that truly shrinks your salary, real salaries. Real wages are basically your pay adjusted for inflation. In other words, how much stuff your income can truly buy. Because money is only meaningful when it transforms into stuff. Rent, food, time, comfort, options. And inflation doesn't only raise prices, it erases purchasing power. It softly edits your life. If you get a 4% raise but prices jumped 8%, you didn't grow richer, you grew poorer with a beautiful-looking paycheck. Your boss can practically hand you more dollars and still pay you less in reality. And the most brutal part? That loss compounds. Because once prices rise, you're not battling inflation anymore. You're fighting the new baseline, and the baseline is now higher forever. So the gap between your salary and your lifestyles becomes permanent unless you catch up. That's why inflation is so psychologically damaging. Even if it slows down, the damage is already done. Now zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about math, it's about how inflation reshapes power. Inflation doesn't strike everyone equally. If you possess assets, stocks, real estate, businesses, high inflation can actually be favorable for you, because assets often rise with inflation. If you own a house, your home price can soar. If you hold equities, corporations could raise prices and profits. If you own a business, you can grow your rates faster than your costs. But if you're a wage worker, you can't suddenly boost your wage because eggs got costly. You have to ask, you have to bargain, you have to wait. And that delay is where inflation steals from you. So inflation becomes a transfer of grief, from asset owners to salary earners, from the people with pricing power to the people with no power at all. That's why it feels personal, because it is. It's not just prices, it's who gets squeezed first, and who gets to pass the squeeze to someone else. When inflation slows down, the economy doesn't reset, it just stabilizes at a new, unfair level. Now here comes the bit that makes the headlines feel even more absurd. When the news says inflation is down, they're usually talking about the inflation rate year over year, meaning they compare today's prices to previous year's prices. But you don't live year over year, you live compared to your recollection, compared to 2019, compared to when your rent wasn't a small mortgage payment, compared to when fast food didn't require a budget meeting. So inflation could be down from last year, but prices are still way up compared to where your brain believes normal should be. And your brain is not wrong, it's just keeping score. Meanwhile, the government cheers because lower inflation suggests the economy is cooling. Central banks relax because their mission is to stop inflation from skyrocketing. But they aren't attempting to make living cheap again. That's not the goal. Their goal is to stop the bleeding, not reverse the injury. And that's why many people feel misled by the headlines, because the system is celebrating a slowdown, whereas average folks are still living inside the aftermath. Now let's speak about the bit almost nobody understands. Even if inflation went to zero tomorrow, you would still feel poorer for a while, because wages lag behind inflation. Companies don't adjust salaries instantaneously. They wait. They test the market. They see if you'll stay. They see if you'll complain. And many people do stay because quitting is risky. So wages climb slowly, but prices soared fast, which creates a lasting mismatch. And here's the irony. Even if your income finally catches up, you might not experience comfort, because by then, other costs have moved too.
Your rent lease renewed, your insurance premium rose, your car repair prices doubled, so you're constantly chasing a finish line that keeps moving.
Except the treadmill is on maximum speed, and you didn't even agree to join the gym. Now there's one more twist. The reason inflation coming down can actually make life feel worse in the short run. Because how do we bring inflation down? We hike interest rates. That's the key weapon. And higher interest rates don't merely slow inflation, they slow you. They make borrowing costlier, credit cards costly, car payments costly, student loan burdens greater, business borrowing difficult, which implies corporations slow hiring, layoffs happen, raises freeze. So inflation might be falling, but job security also starts seeming insecure. And suddenly, even if prices climb slower, your power to make additional money gets diminished. So you feel pressed from both sides. Prices are still high, and your income growth slows significantly. That's the nightmare zone. That's when people start saying, I'm doing everything right, but it's not working. And they're not imagining it. The system is literally geared to suck demand out of the economy, because that's how inflation is regulated, by making people spend less. Which is a polite way of saying they manage inflation by making you poorer. Not permanently, but long enough to settle prices down. And yeah, that sounds dark, because it is. It's economic medicine, and the side effects are felt in your kitchen, at the petrol station, in your rent renewal email, in the way you hesitate before ordering something tiny. The system calls it cooling. You call it, I can't breathe. So when inflation declines from 8% to 3%, the headline shouts victory. But the reality is, prices soared a lot, and now they're climbing a bit. Your paycheck didn't catch up quick enough. Your rent locked in a higher baseline. Your supermarket store normalized bigger margins, and interest rates made it difficult to finance your way out. So your salary feels smaller. Not because you're bad with money, not because you're imagining things, but because you're living in a new price world with an archaic salary structure. And that gap is the full story. Now zoom out even further. This isn't just about you. This is about what happens to a society when inflation hits and salaries don't keep up. People quit saving, they quit investing, they quit having kids, they delay marriage, they move back home, they take on debt merely to stay normal, not to get rich, just to exist at yesterday's lifestyle. And the scariest part, that becomes the new culture. A generation that doesn't feel broke because they're failing, but because the economic floor gradually crept upward, and nobody lowered it again. So the next time you hear inflation is going down, understand what that actually implies. It signifies the fire is still burning. It's just not spreading as fast. And the real question isn't whether inflation goes down. The true question is, will salaries ever catch up to the global inflation already created? Or are we all just expected to grow used to a reduced life and call it normal?